Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so happy to welcome you this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are, to our webinar today. Ready, Set, Access, Planning to Bridge the Digital Divide. I am joined today by my colleague and the Associate Director, Nancy Horton. Hi, Nancy. We're so glad that we're here today. Happy December. Happy holidays, everybody. Um, we are going to talk to you today about web accessibility. We are not providing technical information about web accessibility. We're going to talk about the requirements, and we are going to talk about the deadlines and the exceptions and how to develop a plan to comply with the web accessibility guidelines. Neither Nancy nor I, we know a lot of things, right, Nancy? But we are not experts at web accessibility. So we're going to be talking about web accessibility, but we're not going to be getting into technical specifications. So if that's what you came for, you're in the wrong place. All right, let me go on to the next slide here. As hopefully all of you know out there, we are the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center. We are one of 10 regional centers that make up the ADA National Network. We cover the District of Columbia, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia, and our website is adainfo.org. And you can see we're the number 3 on the map there. Anywhere you are in the country, there's a regional center that serves you. So if you're not in the Mid-Atlantic region, check out, there are centers that serve every state. You can dial the 800 number to reach your center, or you can go to adata.org to get contact information for your center. Okay. As with all our webinars, we want to acknowledge, first of all, that we're funded by the Department of Health and Human Services, the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, otherwise known as NIDLR, which is part of the Center for Administration within the Center of the Administration of Community Living in the Department of Health and Human Services. So we're funded by your tax dollars to do exactly what we're doing today, provide technical assistance and information about the Americans with Disabilities Act. Neither Nancy nor I are attorneys, and none of what we say today is meant to be legal advice. Okay, our agenda today. We are going to give you an overview of the new web access rule, an overview, not a detailed line by line, but an overview of the new web access rule. We're going to talk about the technical standards. We're going to go through each of the exceptions and kind of give you more information about each of the exceptions, and look at the Title II framework, the core concepts, the general obligations and limitations, and look at what equity means for people with disabilities when accessing the web. The most important part, at least what Nancy and I think is the most important part of the webinar, is the second part of the webinar, the planning process, and which is why we wanted to do this webinar today. We wanted to help every single one of you out there to figure out a plan to approach compliance, which will be coming up in April of 2026 and 2027. So we're going to talk about building a team. We're going to talk about the importance of training and support, and ensuring that new content from the compliance date forward is accessible. We're going to talk about contracted services and existing content. What do you do with all the existing content you have? Do you have to make it all accessible to people with disabilities? How do you go about doing that? That is what we're going to talk about today. So our agenda, Nancy, do you want to chime in on anything right now?
No, I think you've done a great job of setting the stage. Absolutely, giving folks the outline of what we're going to address.
Well, let's jump into the basics of the rule, Nancy. I'm going to
Yes.
turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you. Let's start with the basics. This is a Title II rule under the ADA. So it applies to the programs, services, and activities of public entities of state and local governments, otherwise known as public entities in ADA lingo. So this new rule adds a whole new subpart H. We're down to H now. We're really clipping through the alphabet here. We have this whole new subpart in the Title II regulation, which is 28 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 35. And this rule is designed to ensure access for people with disabilities to web content and mobile apps that are made available either directly or through contracts, licensing, or other arrangements with state and local government agencies to post web content, create web content, and all these things on behalf of public entities. So that's where all this is coming from, is this new rule that was issued fairly recently. So
Okay,
go ahead.
next slide. We're
Yes,
gonna we're gonna look at. I'm just finishing your sentence for you, Nancy. We're gonna look at the compliance dates.
yes. Yes. And, bear with us because even though we're not going to get into the weeds of the technicalities of the rule, we do want to establish a little bit of the framework of it because some of this information is going to become very relevant when we start talking about planning and approaching, compliance and what that means. So there are two different compliance dates under this rule, one for larger entities and one for smaller entities in general. So for the larger state or local governments, meaning they have a total population of 50,000 people or more, the compliance date, which Anne alluded to just a moment ago, is coming up fairly soon. It's April 24th of 2026. So next spring is the compliance date for these larger public entities. Smaller entities where the population is 49,999 or fewer, it's an additional year, April 26th of 2027. Also, there's this unique entity known as a special district government, which also has that later compliance date. And if you're not familiar with that terminology or really understand what a special district government is, there's a definition at the bottom of this slide. It's a public entity other than a county, municipality, township, or independent school district. And these special district governments are authorized by state law to provide one or a limited number of functions, and they have sufficient administrative and fiscal autonomy to qualify as a separate government and whose population is not calculated by the U.S. Census Bureau or, in the most recent census or the small area income and poverty estimates. And we're going to talk a little bit more about these things in just a second. But all that lingo, what that really means is typically it's something like a mosquito abatement district or a water sewer district or maybe a transit authority or something, which typically serves a geographic area that tends to cross the defined boundaries of towns and cities and counties and things like that. So you might, in your community, you might get your water and sewer services from this public entity, but it doesn't just serve your city or your county. It sort of serves a wider geographic area. And that's all they do. They just do the water and sewer. That's it. It's a
Okay.
very focused, limited thing that they do. So those special district government, agencies, they get that additional year for their compliance date on into 2027.
So the idea would be these special district government entities, which of course I'd never heard of before this, they provide information on the web as well, right? They have a website, they provide information about the services that they have, et cetera. So they fall under the requirement of the state and local government requirements, even though they're a special district government and not necessarily they are part of the state or local government, but they're not really part of the state or local government.
Yes, they are. I
Okay.
mean, they're not private businesses, right?
Right,
Because this is
right,
Title II rule. So, they are part of the state or local government organization, but they're sort of unique in the way they're defined, and that's important for this rule because the compliance dates are based on population. So you have to
I
know
see.
what's the population that your public entity is associated with to know what your compliance date is. So with a lot of things, it's going to be fairly straightforward. A State Department, it's the state,
Right,
right?
right,
But these special district governments are a little bit unique.
right. And they have their own compliance date.
Right. So they get the
Same
later
as the small.
compliance date.
Right,
Right.
right.
As like the smaller organization. So on our next slide, we talk a little bit more about some of these definitions that are related to these compliance dates so that agencies can figure out which date is really relevant for them. So this total population that we're referring to, 50,000 or more, under that, is based on estimates by the US Census Bureau. We use the most recent decennial census if the entity has a population calculation. Um, we use the most recent small area income and poverty estimates for population. I alluded to that earlier. For independent school districts or instrumentalities of independent school districts. Those again are, these public entities that sometimes are a little bit different in terms of the area that they're really associated with. So the Census Bureau has population data in this small area income and poverty estimates for those entities to figure out their population. So if you're an entity that you're not a special district government or an independent school district, and you don't have a population estimate calculated by the Census Bureau in the most recent census there. But if you're an instrumentality or a commuter authority of one or more state or local governments that do have such a population estimate, then your total population is going to be based on the combined estimates of those entities. So, in other words, if you're a commuter authority and your service area is, 5 counties in one state and a couple counties in another state, and, you
Uh,
know, the District of Columbia or something like that, you're going to take the population estimates for those counties and that district, and you're going to add all those together to figure out your population number, your estimate. Is it over 50,000 or is it under 50,000?
right. So it's either one date or the other.
Yes, it is. But, for a lot of folks, the year makes a big difference,
Correct. A
right? And so
year
it's,
makes a big difference.
yes, to really prepare for that compliance date. So, sometimes it's pretty straightforward, but we have had some questions that I think some examples can be helpful because of the organizational structure of a lot of public entities. So, for example, if you're a county library and your county has 10 libraries, but you're all county libraries. The population for every one of those county libraries is the population of the county for every one of the libraries. It's the same population because they're all part of the county. So the population number is the county. It's not the city that the library is in,
I
or
see. Well, that makes sense.
it's
Okay.
it's the county. If you're a state university, your population is the population of the state. If you're Amtrak, your population is the population of the United States. So, and it's based on the whole population. It's not based on who uses the service or even who's eligible for the service. If you're a county city school or something, you don't count just the children. It's the population of the city.
Got it. Okay.
So I think that helps to
Yeah, no, that
understand.
does. That helps a lot. The examples help.
Yeah.
I think they really do. That's great. Okay. All right. Moving right along, the technical standard.
Yes.
That the technical standard.
Yes, this is a big thing in the new rule, in that the new rule, adopts by reference a technical standard to measure compliance. So the technical standard is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, sometimes referred to as the WCAG or WCAG. People kind of pronounce it different ways. Version 2.1, which has been around since 2018. So a lot of folks have some familiarity with that. And it's the level AA level of that standard. The WCAG is an international standard, really. It's created by the World Wide Web Consortium, also known as W3C, three W's there for World Wide Web. The World Wide Web Consortium operates the Web Accessibility Initiative. And this is a live link here in this slide, which is in your handouts on our website. So you can follow that link if you'd like to visit the Web Accessibility Initiative, and you can find the guidelines there, as well as a wealth of information that's really helpful for technical folks, users, developers, policy makers, all kinds of great information there.
And Nancy, one interesting note that probably a lot of people don't pay attention to because they just go to see what WCAG says about what they're looking for. But the World Wide Web Consortium is a public interest nonprofit organization that's made up of organizations, staff, and the public that works together to develop these standards, which I don't know. I thought that was really interesting, and I think it's pretty amazing that to have these standards developed by a public interest nonprofit organization.
Yeah, it's a really interesting organization. They've been around a long time. And so this is now going to be the measuring stick, so to speak, for compliance when we talk about web content and mobile apps and everything. This is what we're going to be looking at. So web content, again, for state and local governments that they're providing or making available, it needs to comply unless, and there are a few exceptions. And these exceptions here, or these limitations is probably a better word, are just the basic limitations that have been part of Title II of the ADA since the beginning. Covered entities in general don't have to do things that would cause a fundamental alteration in the nature of a service, program, or activity, or that would impose undue financial or administrative burdens. So those are just basic limitations that exist in Title II. So we want to sort of make sure that that's out there and that folks know that that's just like everything else under Title II.
Right, which makes it nice and tidy.
Yes, yes.
They
This,
compliance with Title II is compliance with Title II, and the standard is the standard to, unless it would be a fundamental alteration or undue financial administrative burden, which we've defined a trillion times over the years as we've provided training on Title II.
yes,
Now, we both know there are 5 exceptions, and we're going to walk through the exceptions one by one so we can get to planning. Okay,
yes.
so
Yes. On our next slide, number 9, now these exceptions are specific to this new rule, this new subpart H that's just about web and mobile app stuff. So this is the first exception out of the 5 that there are. We're talking here about archived web content. And I just put down at the bottom of this slide the definition of what web content is. I think most people either know or sort of intuitively understand what web content is. The definition is information and sensory experience to be communicated to the user, including code or markup that defines the content's structure, presentation, and interactions. So what that actually means is text, images, sounds, videos, controls, animations, conventional electronic documents. It's what we think it is, folks. It's the stuff that's up there on the web, in the apps. That's what we're talking about in terms of web content. So when we talk about archived web content, we have a 4-part definition to meet this exception. It's really, really important to understand that all 4 of these points must be in place for the content to, be eligible, if you will, for this exception. Any kind of content, text, all this stuff. So if it was created before the compliance date, before the date the public entity is required to comply. So that's this coming April or the following one. Or it reproduces paper documents or the contents of other physical media. So that could be, a videotape or an audio tape or something physical, an old a film negative or something, reproduces that was created before the compliance date. So in other words, old stuff created before the compliance date, or it's reproducing it. Maybe it's scanning it, converting it, doing something like that to put it online. And it's retained exclusively for reference, research, or record keeping, and it has not been altered or updated after it was archived, and it's organized and stored in a dedicated area or areas that are clearly identified as archives. It could be a separate page or section, it could be a separate section on a page, but it's identified as an archive. And this is not an exception for the page where the content might be or links to it. It's not an exception for the platform, in other words, it's an exception for the content. So the animation, the document, the image. Sometimes it's, how sometimes you have content that's like a collection, and it's the page that tells you what's there is more like a list of links that you can follow or open. So all this stuff has to be, all these 4 things, if they're all met, It's archived, it's identified as such. It does not have to comply with the technical standard, with the WCAG.
Right. But all four have to be and.
Yes,
It's not one or the other.
right. It's got to be all these things are in place. I will say that the one where it says it can't be altered or updated after it's been archived, there are some little, the Department of Justice talks a little bit about, say you're putting up something and you're just going to redact some personal identifying information, somebody's name or something like that before you put it up there. They don't really consider that an alteration. But if you're gonna, change the address or the phone number on the thing or the information that's actually in it or rearrange it or something, now you've altered it.
Right. Okay, Nancy, Ashley has a good quick question here. If the materials aren't needed online anymore, like an old PDF, do we have the option to just remove it? Like it doesn't need to be publicly available
Yeah,
anymore.
no. I mean, what you put online is up to you.
Yeah.
But, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later because, this may present a real good opportunity for any of us to do a little
Clean,
cleanup. Uh,
clean the
you
clutter.
know, of also, I highly, take out the trash. But there are times when we have um, existing content or legacy content, historic stuff that we want to keep and we want to keep it available, particularly for things like research and record keeping. So I'm not recommending that you just wholesale dump out the baby with the bathwater. There may be a lot of reasons to keep historical content, um, but understanding what archived content really is, I think, is important. And one of the things that some of these exceptions are aimed at is finding the balance between making content more accessible soon and addressing other issues over time and improving accessibility over time based on priorities and things of that nature. So, for some organizations, some of this older content might be a big part of what they do. If you're a research library, you've got a lot of old stuff that you don't want to just toss that out. It's part of what you do. So you're going to want to plan how you're going to organize it, how you're going to um, let people know what's there, and those kinds of things. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But no, just because you put something on your website doesn't mean you have to leave it there forever.
Right, right. You get to be the decider about that. And Jess, I do see your questions and we will get to them, but we want to get through our exceptions so we could get to the planning part. So we're gonna keep moving along here, but we will get to your questions because they're good ones, Jess.
Yeah.
Okay, Nancy.
And just in case, I don't know if somebody asked a question about this, but keep in mind that the date of when it was created is important. It's the date it was created. So sometimes, you move something and the system sort of updates it just because you touched it, but you really didn't alter it. So you want to keep track of that. What is the actual real creation date of that content?
Yes,
But
okay.
anyway,
That does answer, I think, one of Jess's questions. So
oh, okay.
let's keep
Or
moving.
maybe.
But yeah,
Yes. Yes, we'll keep moving. So this is exception number two. So this is different from the first one.
exception one.
Exactly that. Number one is got a lot of layers, complexity. They actually get simpler as we go through, folks. So
Yay.
that's something to look forward to. But this one is specific to pre-existing conventional electronic documents. So there's an exception for this unless the document is currently used to apply for, gain access to, or participate in the public entities, services, programs, or activities. So, and down here at the bottom is what are conventional electronic documents? This is a very specific list of things, and it's an exhaustive list. It means these things, and they're not examples. It means just these things. The following formats: portable document formats, so PDFs, anything in a word processor format, things like Word, a presentation format, so something like PowerPoint, or a spreadsheet like Excel or something like that. So those formats and those formats only are what we're talking about here. They are, there's an exception for them. But if it's if it's a PDF form that's the application that a person needs to fill out to get their dog license or something, then it's not going to be eligible for the exception because it's needed now. People need to use it. So it's going to
Right,
need to be replaced or remediated or something. So the exceptions are have some limitations even within the exceptions. So this number 3 on slide 11, the third exception is content that's posted by a third party, basically, unless the third party is posting it on behalf of the public entity. So it's not the third party that you hired to post stuff to your website or your social media channel or whatever. It's it's maybe the public that's adding comments to your Facebook,
right,
you know, page or something like that. There's an exception for that. You don't have to go and make all that stuff accessible or
right.
delete
If
it.
somebody posts a meme in response to something on your Facebook page, yeah,
Right. For so it's some, the public or something like that. The flip side of this is if a state or local government agency posts something on somebody else's, Facebook page, that has to be accessible because it's still the public entity making information available, putting information out there. So, basically everything you do in terms of digital communication and interaction as a state or local government agency really, needs to be accessible, at least moving forward after the compliance date. So that's what we're talking about is getting ready to do that. But again, the public puts something on your Facebook page, you're not responsible for that.
okay. Exception number 4.
And this one is kind of unique. It also has two parts to really be eligible for the exception. This is for individualized conventional electronic documents. And again, remember, these are just those 4 specific types of electronic documents. So we're not talking about your basic web page or something. We're talking about documents, PDFs and spreadsheets and Word documents and things like that. If it is about a specific individual, their property, their account, something like that, and there's that all important and it is password protected or otherwise secured. And again, both of these things are very important. This is not an exception for something that's just password protected, like maybe a web course or some material that a university has posted for the students of a particular class that all 300 students who are taking the class get that password. That's not this. This is an individual homeowner's water bill or something, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
it's private.
yeah.
Yes. Okay.
It's about a specific person and
Okay.
it's secure.
Great. Nancy, the questions are coming in fast and furious. So just FYI. Exception number 5.
Exception number 5 is pre-existing social media posts. Real simple, real straightforward. I mean, this basically means even if you as a state or local government, if that's, who you are, stuff that you posted on your social media before the compliance date there's an exception for that. You're not going to have to go back and,
Well,
remediate that.
okay. So what about this is a good one. What about I would have never thought of this. What about a tweet or a post that by a third party that a local government retweets or reposts.
Well, I mean, if you're reposting it, then isn't, I think that becomes
Your
you.
content,
But
right?
again, if it's, I mean, if we're talking about this exception, again, anything before the compliance date, it's pre-existing. You're just not going to have to go back and do that.
Right,
One of the things about social media is, of course, it changes so fast and so much that I think if covered entities really prepare for the compliance date so that once that compliance date is upon you, you're making sure that all your new content is accessible, then you're not going to have as much problem with
right,
social media because you're going to be putting up similar stuff. So a lot of that stuff on social media is kind of a timestamp on it. Who needs to
right,
look back at what
right,
what
right.
were the snow days for the school about 3 years ago? I mean, it's
Yeah, no, not applicable.
yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of it is really about getting ready to post and create the new stuff that's going to be going up after the compliance date, which again, that's a lot to prepare for.
Right,
But
right,
some of this stuff that probably, if you did have to go back and fix it, would be the lowest priority stuff.
right. Right. And I think that's really, really important because as Jen commented, that this is a lot. It is a lot. And I think once the compliance date comes and goes and people start diving into all this, that it's going to be a lot easier um, to do this as we go along. Then try and remember what are the five exceptions and how does this apply in this situation. And again, we'll be here. We will be here on April 28th after the compliance date.
Yeah, yeah. And
Oh,
some of this is there are going to be some decisions that need to be made based on knowledge of programs and those sorts of things. But again, there are these exceptions, and if something is eligible for any one of the exceptions, then it doesn't have to meet all of them. I mean, some of them have those two, three, four part things to meet the exception. But if it meets exception one, doesn't have to meet number two. It's
right,
right. So we also we're on slide 14 here, and we also want to talk a little bit about something that's allowed when it's really not possible to make web content accessible due to a technical or a legal limitation. This is something where the regulation is a little different from the WCAG. The WCAG allows things like this a little more broadly. But the Title II regulation is a little more narrow to be able to use an alternate version of web content. In other words, you're going to have to create a separate page to make that information accessible. Title II regulations only allow that when it's really just not possible to make that content on the main page accessible because of some sort of a technical or a legal limitation that's related to that content. It's in some kind of a platform that you just cannot make it technically accessible, or it somehow is you can't touch it. You can't, you know, change it, but for whatever reason, you need to leave it there, at least for the time being. You can make what's known as a conforming alternate version. And these other requirements then go along with that. The alternate version has to be comparable to the inaccessible content. It needs to have the same information available, the same functionality needs to be there, and it needs to be kept up to date the same way as the main version, and it needs to be easy to find.
right. Don't post it, forget about it. Now, we have people ask for an example. Can you think of an example where this would be the case?
where it would be the case that it's just not possible to make
Cor-
it
correct,
accessible.
correct.
Yeah, I mean, again, there are some things that are sort of in a structure, in a framework or on a platform, or something that you can't. You just technically can't do it. I don't know that I have an actual example of a specific thing that I
But
can
you can't get
show people.
access to
You
the
just can't.
information
You just can't
online.
do it.
Yeah,
I mean, again, I think where things are like this, and you might be allowed to make a conforming version, in some cases, you might just replace it.
yeah.
You know,
Which would be better anyway, because then you can make the replacement accessible to everybody, and you don't have nobody. You don't want two different versions of something.
right. It's maintaining two different versions is often not the most efficient thing for the covered entity either. It's not as efficient for
Right,
the public if people
right.
have to go find, go somewhere else. Um, but again, this is an allowance, um, and it does give people the flexibility. If you do have something that you really, you can't take it down or you can't replace it right away, you may be able to, even if it's a stopgap, you're going to make this
Yeah.
alternate version, and
No,
then maybe, yeah.
that makes sense. That makes sense. All right. The most important slide of this entire presentation right now, really, really important. If you don't, I told Nancy before the webinar, if you all in the audience don't walk away with anything else today, I want you to remember that even if certain content does not have to conform with the technical standard, public entities still need to ensure that their services, programs, and activities offered using web content and mobile apps are accessible to individuals with disabilities on a case by case basis in accordance with their existing obligations under Title II of the ADA. These obligations include reasonable modifications to avoid discrimination, ensuring that communications with people with disabilities are effective as communications with people without disabilities, and providing people with disabilities an equal opportunity to participate in or benefit from entities, services, programs, or activities. In other words, you still have to comply with all the requirements of Title II. You still have to um, ensure that your services, programs, and activities and information are available and accessible to individuals with disabilities. Thank
Yeah.
you, Nancy. I really needed to say that.
Yeah.
I'm good
Oh,
now.
absolutely. I mean, again, this reminds us of the core,
Right,
the concept, the goal of the ADA itself and Title II. It's about equity, it's about opportunity. And what this also is really underscoring is that, public entities are going to have to continue to do things that are very responsive on a very individual basis.
right,
And sometimes I think that will in turn drive accessibility forward in broader
right,
ways. I think a good example is one of the exceptions we talked about were those password protected individual account things where you go and look at your water bill or you go and look at your medical
right,
records. And so those things are so there's an exception for that. The covered entities are not going to have to go in there proactively and, reconfigure all that and make all of those records accessible. They can make a single individual's records accessible to that individual person in an individualized way. But once they kind of figure out how to do that, or they find a new template or a new platform or something that enables them to create those records or post those records or something in a way that's accessible, maybe over time they sort of convert to that.
right,
So they don't have to have people having to make requests and then do, individual responses and do things different and that sort of thing. Um, but the important reminder, I think, for us now is that, again, same example, just because something's eligible for an exception, you can't tell that person who can't get at their own water bill or medical record, oh, well, too bad, there's an exception for that. You still have to
Right.
make their document accessible or make their account, available to them. So we just really like to remind ourselves that this is the framework of the ADA. This new rule is part of the framework and it fits right in there with the same overall concepts, obligations, and limitations.
Right. Okay. Plans and procedures. Let's talk about approach, Nancy, and how do we even begin to approach this? It's a huge task to take on. I know people are in the middle of working on it now. The deadline is coming up next year, but how do we recommend that a state or local government or an entity or a special government district, whatever, how should they approach this?
Yeah. Well, there are some things that um, I think are, really important because this is a lot. I think sometimes we need to take a breath and really do some things to really prepare, set ourselves up for success, um, make plans and set priorities. And so one of the things that I think is really important to do soon before we go off in all these directions and start trying to fix things is build a team.
Yep.
You know, find, identify, recruit, assign, hire, find people internally who are going to be the leaders in this, who are going to be the point people, maybe on specific tasks. Include people with disabilities where you can get them on your team. They can sometimes serve as testers or advisors, even if it's not their professional role to do that, keeping in mind that sometimes people with disabilities are, what you're getting from them is their personal perspective, but that can be enormously valuable
Right.
in
Right.
in many situations. You need professionals and you need some end users. So people with disabilities could be internal, they could be external. They could be, or maybe your entity has some sort of an advisory committee of people with disabilities or some connections to disability organizations in the community where you can get this sort of connection. Establish a plan, have goals, have time frames, start backing away from the compliance date. What do there's going to be steps, right? There's going to be a lot of steps. So you need to sort of back away from that, set the goals, set the time frames, and then start establishing specific responsibilities for your different team members and put some measures in place for accountability. It's
Yeah,
just,
and
tackling a big job, right?
right. And document it all. Document it all because people change positions, especially within state and local governments, and people move. I mean, that was an issue with the self-evaluation and transition plans. People move, people change and stuff. Document everything and make sure it's in a place that everyone knows where it is so that the person who follows behind isn't left starting from scratch again.
That's such an excellent point. We would hear about those situations with the transition plans and things. Well, things were happening, but that person left, and it was apparently all in their
Right.
head.
Right. Or they took it with them.
Uh-huh.
They took it with them on their, or they deleted it when they left.
Yeah.
Okay, time
So
is slipping here.
yeah, this is a huge piece also, I think, is training people that are internal to your organization because this day and age, it, you know, you don't just probably have one or two people or a contractor or something posting all your content, creating and posting everything you do. You probably have all kinds of staff people, employees, volunteers, who knows, posting to your social media channels, maybe creating web courses, creating forms, creating documents that people are going to need to download. application. You probably have all kinds of people doing outreach, public education campaigns. I put this note in here about email blasts because it's something that's, it's not technically a, web content or app that we're really talking about, but it's digital communication that in this day and age, most people are using these kinds of methods to do outreach, to get information out to the public about sometimes, emergency things, weather alerts and, closings and things of this nature. So really think broadly about all the stuff that, is going on in your digital world. And in most cases, you probably have some folks on your staff that are doing things that you need to be concerned about. And they need training and support and resources um, to make sure that they're making all of that stuff accessible.
Right. And Nancy, we developed a one-page document with some recommendations.
Well, if you need, yes, and I think on our next slide, we talk a little bit about um, contracts and contractors. And I think for a lot of entities, a lot of entities already are using contractors to do all kinds of work around their programs and services, and certainly with digital stuff, creating your web pages, or even just creating the framework that your website is in, or you might be using apps that are coming through third parties and everything. So you really want to review all of that stuff. You want to review any contracts that you have in place. Do they address accessibility? Do they not? Do you need some newer, different contracted services? Are you using any apps that are coming through third parties for people to, pay for parking in municipal parking garages or any of that sort of stuff? You want to take a look at what you have and see if you need additional services, especially with all this work that needs to be done to prepare for compliance and get ready to make sure that anything that you're putting up, creating new after the compliance date is accessible, because you really don't want to keep putting up inaccessible stuff, because then you're just adding to your long-term workload for, remediation and
Right,
archiving and all the other things.
right.
You want to get in a position to make sure that when your new stuff is going to be accessible. And the sooner the better. So you might need contractor to help you literally, repair or develop the underpinning structure of your website, or to help you assess or remediate existing content, or even to train your staff. Some of those contractors, those businesses that we put on our list there, do that as well. They provide staff training for how to create accessible content. So I think that's a big step that a lot of public entities may need to go through, that process of considering contractors.
Right. And you've also the importance of training is it can't be understated. And the more you train existing people who are already building, whether they're contractors or not, the more it's going to be accessible moving forward. And you don't have to keep pulling in people to see if it's accessible or to evaluate it.
Exactly. And again, creating those systems that really enable and or compel people to make things accessible.
Right.
No.
Right. Right. And that's what we're trying to do here is create that system.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got about 6 minutes here.
Well, and this I think is our final slide with content on it. And we wanted to talk a little bit about existing and legacy content. We touched on it a little bit, but this again is part of the process. You need to identify content that maybe could be eliminated, do a little
Clean
cleanup.
it up, clean the clutter.
Yeah, I mean, if it's just really not needed for anything at all, even, posterity, you can get rid of things. And if things are appropriate to be archived and they're not, they maybe need to just be moved. Archives need to be organized, and identifying and prioritizing things that need to be remediated or
Yeah.
replaced.
Yeah.
And this is a piece where I think the team, in some cases, may need to reach out to people who operate different programs and services, conduct different activities. Your team, um, even if you have a great team, especially if you're a large agency, county or a large city or a large state department or something that has a lot of variety, a lot of programs, you might want to reach out to the program operators to help you, especially with that prioritization. You can look at web analytics and things like that. What do people use the most? What are they accessing the most? You can consider things like that. What information is most frequently used? What kind of information is really, really important? Information about emergency planning and where are the shelters and things like that. But you might want to talk to some of the program people that can help you understand what different programs are like, because that can really feed into that prioritization piece, because you're not going to be able to fix everything at once.
Yeah.
And this last point is just something that is a lot of what we're talking about here is best practices. And I think this is one, but I think it's really important. It's important not just about this issue, but always provide contact information for people who need to may have a request or they have a question. They've encountered some inaccessible content. They need to request, that you provide it to them. Something like that. Always provide information that's easy to find, up to date, accurate, names, phone numbers, email, so that people don't get more frustrated trying to figure out what to do and where to go when they've encountered a problem or they have a question. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, unfortunately, our time is coming to an end. We have about 2 minutes. Nancy, thank you so much. This is a lot of information, and we did make it through all the slides, so yay. Unfortunately, we were not able to get to a number of the fabulous questions. So, those of you who have these questions, and they are excellent, please, please call us. A lot of our friends are out there participating today. Hello, Corey Paradis and Jen Janai. I saw, and Michelle Cook. Hello, hello. And so please call us. We are happy to talk to you. Um, People are saying a part two would be grand.
We could certainly do that. We didn't think we'd have so many questions and that so much.
Well, and there are a lot of questions, and they're good questions. So they're questions, and when I say good, I mean it's not just a yes or no answer. It's a yes and a discussion. So I think we would have no problem filling 60 minutes. So no, seriously, I think we ought to do that, and I'm saying that out loud in front of all the people who are attending, who are still online, all 253 of you. But thank you to all of you who attended today. As I said, please give us a call or email us, and with your questions. Look for a part two, which will be questions and answers. We will kind of briefly go over the content again, and then just get into the questions and answers. So yes, people are saying, please do part two. And they're
Do that.
very informative, good, because it's so important to, and we want to address the questions, especially the great question about what do you do when nobody cares about making things accessible in your office, and how can you make a difference there, which is a great question.
Well, we can certainly do a follow-up.
Yes. Okay.
And yeah, really, thank you folks for joining us today. This has been
Yes.
perfect.
and happy holidays. We hope you have a great holiday. We will be on holiday too for a little while, but we will be checking messages, and we hope you enjoy and everybody gets rest and comfort and joy.
Thank you.